We're talking about the biggest names to add on your waiver wire for week 2 next on Fantasy Football Today in 5. Welcome to FFT in 5, where week 1 is officially in the books after the Seahawks surprisingly hung on for an upset win over Russell Wilson and the Broncos in a game where Geno Smith really cooked for the first half, at least. The Seahawks offense kind of fell apart once the Broncos got the script down. But I'm here with Dan Schneier. We're going to talk about that game's biggest winners and losers before we move on to the top waiver wire targets for week 2. And Dan, I'm interested in your thoughts on a winner from this game because I'm not sure there's an obvious one. Maybe you think there is.
I don't think there's an obvious one at all. As far as winners go, I would say my lean would be Javonte Williams based on the fact that he was more involved than Melvin Gordon, but obviously the fumbles were there. But he was involved in the pass game, which you want to see. But I'll say Courtland Sutton because he did seem to be more involved from a target standpoint than Jerry Jeudy, though at the end they did start to get Jeudy a little involved. So it's tough to find an obvious winner in this, but I'd probably go with maybe those three.
Yeah, Javonte's a tough one because he did get the 12 targets. He was heavily involved in their comeback attempt, but 7 carries to Melvin Gordon's 12. I think you could argue at least relative to expectations. Javonte could be argued as a loser for this week because the game script's not always going to feature as many of those dump offs as we saw to Javonte, but that's fine. We'll move on. Who do you think is a loser from this game?
I mean, I have to start with this one, unrelated to fantasy. Nathaniel Hackett, that was one of the worst coaching performances I've ever seen in a debut for a coach. Between the clock management, him and the OC, they were cooking through the air. They just took the ball out of the air, decided to try to play for a field goal. The false starts, all the chaos penalties. But from a fantasy standpoint, the biggest loser for me is Tyler Lockett here because there's just not going to be enough pass volume to go around for him and DK. And it does feel like DK is the lead target here, and he's going to continue to be that way. And he's also the more impressive receiver on, at least for this specific quarterback skill set.
Yeah, I was surprised that Geno Smith didn't take more deep shots with DK. He had 7 targets, 7 catches, 36 yards. That's, you can do the math on that one your own, but not a lot of air yards there. Tyler Lockett, four targets, 3 catches, 28 yards. So not a lot going on. The Seahawks got some good production out of a bunch of random tight ends early on. None of them named Noah Fant. So that was pretty bad sign for him. But yeah, weird game. The Seahawks got a lot out of their scripted offense early on. I'm not sure that's something that I expect to look like that moving forward. But let's move on to the top waiver wire targets for week 2. You can listen to the full episode of Fantasy Football Today and check out Jamie Eisenberg's full waiver wire column on Tuesday morning for more. But let's just go through each position and hit the highlights. Quarterback. Is Marcus Mariota the top waiver wire target coming off that 72 rushing yard performance, or would you rather have someone like Ryan Tannehill or Jameis Winston or Justin Fields, who are all like in the 60 to 70% rostered rate?
I think if you're in a spot where you lost Dak Prescott for the year, I wouldn't be looking at Mariota because I do remain unconvinced he's going to be the starter long-term there. I think they're going to have to get a look at Desmond Ridder. I really like Jameis Winston of the bunch that you mentioned. I think Winston has the tools right now when it comes to Mike Thomas, who's showing again why he's the best red zone receiver in the NFL with his body control and his ability on those back shoulder balls. Olave and Landry, I thought, looked really good when I went back and watched the Game Pass. So all 3 of those players are looking good. He has really good weapons there and a pretty good offensive line. So it would be Winston for me.
All right. At running back, is Jeff Wilson's the obvious top choice with Elijah Mitchell out, at least it sounds like 6 to 8 weeks. Najee Harris, they're saying it's not a serious injury, but I think Jaylen Warren's still going to be worth rostering just because this is already a recurrence of the injury that Najee Harris was dealing with in training camp. But Wilson's going to be the main guy if you need someone for week 2, especially. And look, if you're like me and you have a team with Cam Akers and Devin Singletary as your top 2 running backs, you might need to blow the bank on Jeff Wilson. How much of your fab budget would you bid on him?
I really like Wilson. I'm not as big on Warren because I just think that from what I saw from that offensive line with the Steelers, it's disaster zone, and Mitch was really bad. But as far as Wilson goes, he has a proven track record of having some fantasy success, albeit on a small sample size, within the same system. The biggest issue, though, for me with Wilson, which is why I probably only spend like 35 to 40% of my budget, is this 49ers offensive line has been trending down. It was considerably worse last season than it was the year before. And from what I saw in week 1 against the Bears front that lost its 2 best players, Nakeem Hicks and Khalil Mack, I was really disappointed with that 49ers offensive line. So I'm a bit scared now of really that entire offense.
All right, rank these wide receivers in terms of your priority ad list. Tyler Boyd, with T. Higgins dealing with that concussion.
Yes.
Jarvis Landry, like you mentioned, 114 yards in the opener. Sterling Shepard actually looked pretty good, 72 yards, had that big touchdown, showed he's still got some speed, although there was a busted coverage on that one.
Mm.
Or Curtis Samuel, who I thought was arguably one of the biggest storylines of week one. 4 carries, 11 targets, lined up in the backfield a bunch of times. Kind of an East Coast Deebo Samuel. Very, very poor man's Deebo Samuel. But how would you rank Tyler Boyd, Jarvis Landry, Sterling Shepard, and Curtis Samuel? And did I weight it enough to Curtis Samuel's favor?
Well, I gotta be honest. Chris deserves all the credit in the world because he called this out as kind of a Deebo Samuel light roll about like a month and a half ago. On if you can dig back and find it if you went back through our website, but it's really interesting to me to see how Scott Turner used him, the coordinator for the Commanders. It was almost like this wasn't Terry McLaurin's target share. It was almost like an even split between the 3 of them. So I really like Samuel. The first one for me would be Jarvis Landry because I was just so insanely impressed with what he was able to do out there and really how he looked. It looked like the prime Landry. So I'd go Landry, Samuel, and Shepard. And who was the third? Who was the fourth one you mentioned?
Tyler Boyd.
Yeah, Boyd would still be last for me. I think this concussion won't linger too long.
All right. Any tight ends worth adding? I like Gerald Everett at 59% rostered. I think he's probably the obvious one.
Yeah, Everett for me was someone I drafted in all leagues. He was my version of the Alberto or David Njoku, whoever everybody liked as their last round tight end. I think he's a receiver playing the tight end position. I think Justin Herbert raved about him on the Yahoo Sports podcast with Austin Eckler. So did Eckler. And he had a great camp and it converted to week 1. And that was a really tough catch he made on a laser from Herbert, and he had great body control to get in the end zone. So it won't be there every week. It's never there every week for anyone but Travis Kelce basically these days, but it'll be there sometimes.
All right, that's going to do it for Fantasy Football Today in 5. For more waiver wire help, make sure you go to cbssports.com/fantasy for Jamie Eisenberg's full column, or check out the full episode of Fantasy Football Today. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye.